The VR ecosystem can be a daunting step to get into. Unlike a game that you can just put down, VR is a hardware step in addition to the platform, and judge not only on what it can do, but how easily that it does it, how well it mimics other functions, and how good the sense of presence is. Standalone versus wired is a battle that's going to rage until compression somehow takes that out of the equation. And the PSVR2 joins the wired headset VR family very soon. The PSVR2 comes in the mid to high price range, $549 for the system alone, with tracked haptic controllers via internal cameras, high eye tracking fidelity built in, combined with hopefully Sony's excellent understanding of comfort, and merging it all together into a system that feels natural with the PlayStation 5. Thanks to Sony for the review unit. As you guys know, that means I buy a unit of my own and I will give it away to one of the watchers, as actually putting out my money on these things is really the only way to feel if it's worth it or not. No freebies here. PSVR2 is Sony's gamble into the otherwise strangely fragmented VR ecosystem, especially when they originally announced it to now. Where Meta once reigned, its own price increase slowed the market, and then the delivery of its next-gen version, so outpriced as to be a different consumer type completely, ended up showing that VR didn't have the best future. Strangely, AR and video eyeglasses like Nreal Air have been getting greater fanfare, but Xbox long ago canceled their own plans, and Sony is the remaining unit put together on consoles to do this. Enter the PSVR. Design. Inside the box, you're going to find the controllers, the headset, the cable for the headset, and additions for the music, which I'll talk about in a second. For each controller, it weighs about 174 to 176 grams, and it's 560 for the headset itself. Quest 2 is about 503, and Reverb is about 544, just for clarification. The PSVR has a single head strap with a thick padded backing that fits just below the midpoint of the back of the head, with the tension dial to tighten the strap as well as adjustments for distance for the lens away from your eyes. It is plastic. It's the same slightly rough exterior that the DualSense uses, and it also has an accordion-style gasket between the user's face and the front of the goggles to block out light. This is one of the better systems I've ever seen for a face gasket in VR. There really is no light bleed at all to speak of around the edges of the lenses, because Sony decided to use 2 or 3 soft layers like double curtains, removing the pressure of one stiffer material, and instead has this accordion gate style, and it works insanely well. Much has been said about the headset being wired. It is tethered. There's not much to discuss here. You'll notice it, and all the negatives that come with a tethered device will pop up here, especially spinning around, twisting, stepping on the cable. Those are gonna happen. But when it comes to the comfort of the headset itself, it's actually very nice. It rests just exactly where you would want. You also have a pass-through ability for you to not have to lift up that front end at all. It's a one-button press on the actual headset so that you can see around the room if you don't want to take it off. Those all work, even though admittedly that view is a little bit odd and off-putting. Lastly, the PSVR2 does have a small fan inside the system that blows inside the unit, cooling the chip as well as removing heat from the headset, and that goes a long ways for comfort. Now, when you grab the controllers, the first thing you notice is that they're just a massive improvement to those from the original PSVR. That's like saying a headache is better than smashing your head with a rock, but that's the way it is. Sony's design team put some serious effort into these. And the first is moving that tracking ring away from the edge of the controller and back towards your hand inside, almost like a bracelet. It does make actions like reloading rifles or other controller-to-controller movements a bit easier, and it just feels more comfortable. The triggers do feel like they have a bit less pull length than the DualSense, but they work well, and the ergonomics of the controller means that they're very comfortable regardless of how long you play. Also, they're weighted better. Now, battery life is something I'm testing because some of these seem to level out over a period of time, but these charge up either with Sony's Charge Station or pretty much any USB-C plug-in. Thumb placement, control, and range were fine. One thing that I do want to bring up, it's not necessarily negative, but this controller is pretty much truly round for the most part, meaning that resting this somewhere, like for a moment while you're doing something and then trying to grab it, these things roll around quite easily. It was something I didn't even expect until I put one down for a second, and it started rolling around the moment I did. It's just the way it's designed. Trying to grab them also without having the headset on your see-through mode, the exterior view, can be pretty difficult to figure out where you're supposed to put your hands, because it does have such a unique feel to it that it can be quite easy for you to grab the wrong controller and try to figure out exactly what's going on and just seeing your hands freaking out. Not a big deal, not something that anybody needs to worry about, but I figured I'd bring it up because, well, it happened. But the best part about the PSVR2 is how easy this thing is to set up. The PS5 instantly sees it, walks you through a setup phase that includes the eye tracking examples as well as understanding how the mechanical dial on the PSVR2 adjusts the lens to make everybody's face and pupil distance count for the picture that they'll be seeing. Something that is a little bit wonky on a lot of other headsets. Here with that dial, it's actually quite easy. The headset then requests that you look around, and it does its best to identify the boundary that you play in, marking out sections with chairs and cats and dogs and couches and desks. I will say it does its best. There's a couple, I guess you would call them adult gates that you see within the OS itself, probably to make it safer, and I totally get that, but I would like the ability to maybe sort of say, hey, I'm an advanced user and I'd like to adjust this. The boundary system is a bit finicky, and you can't turn off the grid warning when you go outside of it, although that option might be hidden somewhere. I couldn't find it. So going in and adding a bit to your own boundary is probably advised, since humans aren't sausages, and you may swing your hand over your desk or your hand over your couch or the bed, but the boundary will just keep going off again and again. This is not a complaint towards the system. It is just the way boundary systems work. Setup was about 5 minutes. Not bad at all. It uses a USB to USB-C kind of setup for the front of the PS5. Now, eye tracking in particular is going to be a thing. And I got to talk about this even in setup, but I'll talk about it in games. Eye tracking for inventory in games is going to be incredible. The eye tracking worked pretty much perfectly throughout this. They also have, of course, foveated rendering, which is where the game renders a higher resolution depending on where you're looking. I'm going to talk about that because a couple games were trying to do something akin to that, and it was quite noticeable. But talking about the eye tracking itself for inventory, the idea of going into an inventory and no longer playing a World War II submarine trying to go down, 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 right, 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 down, right to pick up some weapon in your inventory is going to be replaced with you just looking at it. To really point out just how much quicker that is impossible, other than to say it's pretty much instant. And it also worked for every single person that I had test out the headset. Now, the headset also comes with a pair of headphones. It has these earbuds that plug into the 3.5 connection, so you can use others if you want. They also come with 3 different sizes to the earbud adapters, which I actually thought was a nice touch. Each earbud has about 5 inches of cable length to them when you connect them to the PSVR2. When not in use, they even actually have this little earbud holder that can keep them from dangling around on the sides. Sound quality, though, is exactly what you expect from a pair built to be packaged in a mass product. The same can be said for the microphone. These are totally workable, but the frequency responses are not wonderful, and any bass tones and low notes are almost instantly lost when you start to play. It still allows for you to hear some of that 3D audio that is going to be so useful in VR games. But what's nice is that ability to unplug or plug that in and also put your own on at any time when you want. Now, I don't know the output of that 3.5. I did hook a couple pairs up, and I noticed that their sound did diminish pretty quickly. But just be aware, if you have a high ohm system, you may need to use a battery amp or something like that. Still, a very good setup for audio. I think that was awesome. May not be to everyone's spec. I know a lot of people are starting to like the audio systems that are built into the sides of these VR systems, but personally, I thought this was really good. Now, once you put the system on and you start playing it, the first thing you're going to notice is, of course, the picture quality after the comfort. The PSVR2 is using an OLED screen with 2000 by 2040 per eye resolution and a refresh rate of 90 to 120. While not the highest resolution of all the headsets that we can test are out there, it's a massive step up from the PSVR, and more importantly, this means that when gaming, the resolution is much closer to an HD display than you would normally see on a headset. And that comes into play the moment you decide that you want to just jump into a normal game and play that game without taking the headset off. It is a huge boon. Second screen works for this. The original looked pretty good, whether viewing full VR content or normal games, though. The PSVR2 has a picture quality that is actually outstanding for what you would expect when looking at a console that's just displaying your Hogwarts or your God of War. While there isn't any screen door effect here, there is the slightest of an almost weave-like look that makes up the picture, and I've seen this on a couple units. It is just something that's there. If you look for it, you're going to find it, but if you don't, you are easily going to miss that. Additionally, settings for the headset let you turn the brightness up and down, as well as adjust the cinema mode's FOV for when you're playing a normal game. The FOV in normal VR is around 110, which is pretty much expected for a console VR. One place I did notice a problem and did notice issues was smearing, and this was noticeable, I would say, in 40% of the games. When saddling, or strafing, sliding, or just turning in place, whatever technology that the PSVR2 is using to get that frame rate where it needs to be, it's just much more noticeable that the straight lines of a ship in, say, Star Wars, or standing along with the tribe members in Call of the Mountain, have some kind of insertion method that is being used. It threw me off a bit, I will be honest, because it was noticeable right away. Adjusting the light a little bit and adjusting the brightness, and depending on the game, you can turn that down or up. You will notice it's more pronounced when using the sticks to turn. Obviously, I think we can all understand that. The sticks are never going to turn at the speed of a human head. While smearing shows up in some games, noticeably, like I said, in Horizon Call of the Mountain, the idea that a console with this level of GPU power was going to drive games natively at 90 or even 120 refresh rate wasn't always feasible, depending on the game. So this is something that I think a lot of people are going to overlook, and I can personally say that after playing it for a while, that went away and it didn't bother me. I think it's an expectation of what you're getting here. It is what it is. The game still looks good when you're playing it. And that's what matters, playing it and how long you can play it. VR has a particular category that a lot of other systems and games don't, and that's long-term playability, and it's even more important on a console. VR is only one of a few truly comfort-bound entertainment devices right now, with enjoyment dramatically lowering as the comfort drops, a situation that every headset designer has tried to alleviate, with lighter headsets, different types of face gaskets, different weight distributions on the headset straps, and multi-point head straps, as well as fans inside some units to remove fog or cool the user. And this is where we're going to get into my testing. The PSVR2 gasket I tested for many hours. It isn't the exact same design, as I said, as the PSVR. This time it's larger and somewhat softer. The strap on the PSVR also seems to spread the weight of the device in a crown pattern, with most of that weight on the stress points behind your head or on top of it. Ergonomically, the headset is actually very good. There's a band to tighten the unit, and it holds it while not applying too much pressure on your face. It has a number of adjustments, including sliding the faceplate forward and back, as I said before. Now, while previews have been glowing, one of the reasons why they really have no bearing on the actual product, and why most people don't believe them, is because VR in particular has two problems that just can't be demonstrated in previews, and that's lighting and tracking over time. Long-term comfort, I tracked in 4 8-hour sessions, noting comfort at each hour. I noticed that the first hour, I was pretty much unaware of the headset at all. However, by the second hour, it was noticeable, and by the third hour, I did need to take off the headset every other hour or so for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. One thing to remember is that while every VR headset has its own strengths and weaknesses, PSVR2 is solely for a console, which many times, by their very definition, have much longer playtimes as users sit down on the couch. Also, the ease in which a gamer can switch from a VR game directly to another game, a strength here, and still use that PSVR2 as the main unit for display, could see longer playing times. So the weight, the control, the comfort, all of those are going to matter. Now, after extended playtimes of PSVR2 reminded me a lot of the HP Reverb in its lightness and fit, though the weights are different and balanced different, and I think the PSVR2 strap feels overall better. When it comes to tracking, the PSVR2 shows some weaknesses that we see in all of these headsets that track in this way, where they have an internal tracking system. Cameras on the headset look around the room, consistently update the headset's locations, and also find the controllers. First, the headset itself and tracking didn't really seem to have any issues at first. Quick movement, turning fast, high and low light settings in the room, as low as a HDR TV being the only thing on. The headset never really lost its location ever, and it seemed to track pretty perfectly. The big weakness here, though, was the controllers. When I do testing for this, I have a single light system as well as a multi-point light system, as well as a soft wall sconce light system that is in a room approximately 9 by 12 feet. The controllers did show drops regardless of which brightness settings I had set up. And this is something that the Reverb and the other systems will usually get through, maybe with a little jitter, but there were a lot of issues, especially with the right controller on the PSVR2, to the point to where I would end up spinning in place and then switch rooms to see in a normal room what exactly was going on. And it still had it. Occasionally, the controllers would also delay inputs for movement as well on their sticks. Now, that's something I've never seen. That is frustrating, and to be fair, a bit nauseating. Understanding what that means is, if I'm running around in a game and I'm using the thumbsticks for movement, as in soft movement, not teleportation, sometimes, for whatever reason, some games would buffer that movement or not take that movement right away, and you'd be pushing the controller and nothing would happen, and then it would just catch on out of the blue. Now, this is something that I haven't really seen in a lot of other systems that handle VR. Usually they're always watching for the buttons on the sticks and the buttons on the controllers. It's just that tracking exactly where they are might be difficult. I really can't remember the last time this kind of thing happened, and I do want to see Sony definitely take a look at that, because if it just happened here on a test unit, you can bet somebody else is going to have that. So what I did was I reset the PS5 again, recalibrated the PSVR2 4 times. It did show up regularly, regardless of the lighting settings, and it seemed to get a little bit worse as you continue on. There's a lot of these games that have you reaching up, reaching down, reaching below you, and the system has to track using those 4 cameras and find where those controllers are. But at the very minimum, it shouldn't be holding back movements and button presses, which this for sure was. It could just be an issue with their driver. It could be some kind of issue where perhaps the PSVR is getting interference from some system. Any of the systems where they do this kind of tracking, there's going to be some kind of interference, and sometimes this will just pop up. I will say that regardless of those problems, and they were frustrating, once I started moving around, started adjusting lights, sort of finagling things, rebooting the system a couple times, I got it working pretty well in most games. There are a couple games that seem to be extraordinarily difficult, and Call of the Wild is one of them, because many times you're climbing and you are reaching far below you, far above you, far to the right, or far to the left, and a lot of times those controllers are going out of the camera screen. Hardware-wise, despite some issues, I'm more than impressed, and certainly more impressed than I expected to be. I've never seen a VR system without some problems. You just sort of know that when you get them, from Meta to Reverb, Index, Pimax. So for Sony to get this all up and running and run into the same tracking issue that everybody does, just because that's the normal weakness, is less of an issue to me. It is something that I think that they'll be able to patch pretty quickly. They also have 1 or 2 settings where it inserts a frame on your TV screen so that it can track everything a little bit easier. The only problem is some people are going to be using this without the screen in the same room or on, so that was a little unhelpful. But they've already got a lot of options in there for fixing these kind of problems, and I honestly have to say, once everything got up and running, it was a fairly bumpless experience. And I think one of the reasons why is the OS and the strength of Sony when it comes to how they are paying attention to things on the internal side. While I expect to see some new features patched in, I jumped in there, and being able to bounce between VR games and normal games without any issues is just awesome. The PSVR's higher resolution and comfort made that switch pretty seamless, and I really enjoyed going in and out. The boundary system is a boundary system. We're going to have those problems all the time. But it's really seamless in the output. The output goes directly to the TV, but you can also have it off. This is nice for people who just want to stream a game or have someone see the game, but it's also if a player wants to sit back and play a game by themselves. There is a lot going on with this system, and for the price, while it is expensive, it's more than the console itself, and we can argue the logistics of that. It is an expensive device regardless. You're still getting a lot for your money. And that also includes a lot of motion sickness settings that help you get away from that in their games with vignettes and so forth. Now, motion sickness is a problem that a lot of people are going to run into. I noticed that the games didn't really drop frames that much, though there was the issue with that control that I talked about. If they're not dropping frames for the most part, I don't see anybody having too big of an issue with the motion sickness. I did notice, again, in some games when you're turning left and right, it feels a little bit hedgy, and there might be some people that feel just a little bit odd there. And if you add the smear on top of that, which is, again, just something that sort of comes along with this particular technology, I could see some people having some problems with motion sickness. But I don't think it's anywhere near what we've seen with a lot of other headsets. And because they are banking on the PS5's actual power and exactly what it can do, I think that there's a lot we can see in the future from these guys that are going to nail that headset in a very particular way and show some of the strengths and promises that you get with that. And that doesn't even really jump into ways I could see these controllers being used with all of their haptics, something that some of the games used, but really I would say nobody took severe advantage of. So that's it for me on this one. I would say right now, if you want to jump into VR, this might be a system for you. I would say watch for the games. There's a Resident Evil coming out. There's that kind of stuff. There's No Man's Sky is coming out. There's a lot of ports coming out. When it comes to fresh original games, I really want to see Sony hedge on their strength, which is first-party support. I would like to have seen, to be honest, Killzone VR. I talked about this about 9 months ago on the podcast. I was really surprised we didn't see like a Killzone VR experience or something like that. I think that would be great. But there's a lot this headset can do. And I think Sony has gone out of their way to make sure that they can keep it running on a system of lower power using the head tracking, the eye tracking, the foveated rendering, all that kind of stuff, and really deliver to people an experience in the long run. It is still expensive, though. GT7 is phenomenal on this thing. If you're a racing fan, there's your title right there. But $550 for a single title is a big is a big get. So anyway, that's it for me. I'd like to know what you guys think. If you could share this, I would appreciate it. The biggest, worst monster of all is the YouTube algorithm. So if you can subscribe, hit the notify all bell, that would help the channel, since a lot of these just get destroyed and disappeared into the nether. If you get a chance, follow me on Jeremy Penner at Twitter, where you'll hear me talking about new games, the podcast every Friday, as well as new reviews coming your way here in just 2 days after this one pops. Peace out, gang gang.